Eleanor Whitmore placed the $2 million check on the steel table without looking the man across from her in the eye. She had done this 11 times before. 11 men had stood inside her father's glass garage with polished shoes, expensive watches, famous names, and the kind of confidence that made silence feel like an insult. 11 men had promised her they understood Italian engineering, classic fuel delivery, early Lamborghini electrical architecture, carburetor synchronization, ignition mapping, factory tolerances, and the soul of a 1971 Miura. And 11 men had failed. Her father's Lamborghini still sat in the center of the room like a $4 million coffin, silent beneath a black velvet cover, its yellow body hidden like something sacred that no one had the courage to uncover. But the man standing in front of her today was different. He did not arrive in a tailored suit. He did not bring assistance. He did not ask for sparkling water or climate control or a private consultation room. He wore a blue work uniform with oil still dark beneath his fingernails. His boots were scuffed. His sleeves were rolled. His brown hair was pushed back carelessly, and there was a thin scar along his right thumb. The kind a man earns not from danger he brags about, but from work he does every day. He did not glance at the check. He did not ask whether it was certified. He did not ask who else had failed. He only looked at the covered Lamborghini for a long moment and said quietly, "Fuse number 7. Has anyone replaced it?" Eleanor finally looked at him, not because she respected him yet, not because she believed him, but because after 3 years, 1 dying father, 11 experts, and $1,700,000 wasted on failure, no one had ever asked a question that small. One man with oil on his hands. One $9 question. And everything Eleanor Whitmore had built around grief, power, and money was about to shake. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity, grace, second chances, and the quiet kind of wisdom money can never buy, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us that truth does not always arrive wearing a suit. Sometimes it walks in through the side door, wiping its hands on a rag. Now, back to Eleanor Whitmore. She stood alone in the glass garage at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, the way she had stood there too many nights over the last 3 years. The garage had been custom built for her father, Joseph Whitmore, long before hospitals, oxygen tanks, legal paperwork, and grief had turned his life into something smaller. It was 400 square meters of polished concrete, floor-to-ceiling glass panels, halogen lights, and silence. A place designed for sound, speed, and celebration had become a museum of things unsaid. In the center of it all sat the 1971 Lamborghini Miura P 400 SV in Giallo Miura, a yellow so warm and deep it looked less like paint and more like sunlight hardened into metal. It had been her father's favorite thing after her mother. Not an asset, not a collectible, not a trophy to be appraised by auction houses. To Joseph Whitmore, that car had been a memory with wheels. He had bought it in 1988 at a private auction in Geneva and shipped it home with the excitement of a boy hiding a secret. He restored parts of it himself in the driveway of the first house he and Margaret ever owned, getting grease on his shirts and laughing when Margaret threatened to ban him from dinner unless he scrubbed his hands properly. In 1991, Joseph and Margaret drove that Lamborghini through 12 states in 22 days with no itinerary, no hotel reservations, and no plan except to keep driving until they found something beautiful enough to stop for. Eleanor had grown up with those photographs lining the hallway, her mother's hair flying across her face, her father's hand on the wheel, the two of them smiling like time could never catch them. Those photographs had taught Eleanor what love looked like before she had words for it. But the night Margaret Whitmore died, the Lamborghini was idling in the garage. Joseph had been warming it up for an early morning drive, a habit he kept even after Margaret became too sick to ride with him. At 11:47 p.m., while Eleanor was racing toward Mercy General Hospital and Joseph was sitting in a waiting room with a paper cup of cold coffee between his trembling hands, the engine cut off. No warning, no sputter, no dying cough from the exhaust. One moment the V12 was alive, low and steady beneath the garage lights, and the next moment, it was gone. By the time Joseph came home 3 days later, Margaret was gone too. He walked into the garage still wearing the same coat Eleanor had found him in at the hospital. He stood in front of the yellow car, and for a long time, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "She called it home." Eleanor did not argue. There are some sentences people say not because they make sense, but because their hearts will collapse if they do not believe them. So she covered the Lamborghini with black velvet, took her father gently by the arm, and led him back into the house. And from that day forward, Joseph Whitmore, a man who had once filled every room with laughter, stories, and impossible plans, began to disappear while still breathing. He stopped calling old friends. He stopped going to the garage. He stopped eating at the long dining table and started taking toast in his room. He stopped arguing with doctors. He stopped asking for the newspaper. Within 18 months, his lungs began failing in the slow, patient way grief sometimes teaches the body to surrender. Dr. Isaac Brennan, a careful man with tired eyes and a voice built for difficult truths, called Eleanor one Thursday afternoon and told her what no billionaire daughter wants to hear. Medicine could sustain Joseph, but it could not make him want to stay. "Your father has stopped being curious about tomorrow," Dr. Brennan said. "The body follows that decision more often than we like to admit." Eleanor had asked what could be done because that was how she understood pain. Identify the problem, fund the solution, remove the obstacle. Dr. Brennan hesitated. "He has spoken about the Lamborghini 4 times in our last 2 appointments. Once about how it sounds at full throttle, once about the gearbox on a mountain road. The other times he only said he missed it." Eleanor looked out the window of her Chicago penthouse and felt something sharp move beneath her ribs. "Then I'll fix it," she said. She drove to the estate that night. She pulled back the velvet cover, stared at the Lamborghini's unblinking headlights beneath the halogen glow, and called her assistant, Diana Walsh. "Find me the best Lamborghini restorer in the country," she said. Money is not a factor. But money, as Eleanor would learn slowly and painfully, was exactly the wrong factor to worship. Within 48 hours, the first specialists arrived from Los Angeles. 3 men, all reputation and certainty, with matching jackets embroidered with a restoration logo Eleanor had seen in luxury car magazines. They diagnosed a blocked fuel delivery system and proposed a complete overhaul for $180,000. Eleanor approved it without negotiation. They worked with the theatrical precision of men who knew they were being watched. They spoke loudly enough for Diana to hear words like period correct, rare calibration, and factory-level restoration. Their final invoice was itemized across 4 pages. The car did not start. Eleanor dismissed them with a politeness sharp enough to draw blood. A week later, an Italian-born engineer named Adriano arrived from Miami, a man who claimed to have worked near Sant'Agata Bolognese in the 1980s and carried his accent like a credential. He inspected the engine for 35 minutes and announced that the V12 had developed internal tolerance issues requiring a full rebuild. $320,000. 6 weeks. Guaranteed. Eleanor approved it. 6 weeks later, the Lamborghini still did not start. Adriano insisted the work had been correct and the problem must lie elsewhere. He used the phrase elsewhere like a man pushing a corpse into another room. By the 8th week, the experts came in waves: 2 firms from New York, a concours restoration house from Scottsdale, consultants from Chicago, Atlanta, and Beverly Hills. Each had a theory. Each theory sounded expensive. The carburetors were rebuilt. The ignition coils were replaced. The distributor cap was replaced. The timing chain was checked, then replaced anyway. A fuel pump that cost more than some families' cars was installed and removed when it changed nothing. One consultant spent 4 days on the electrical system and left behind 40 pages of documentation, 3 new diagnostic folders, and a car that remained exactly as silent as when he entered. Every failure made the room colder. Every invoice made Joseph quieter. Eleanor did not care about the money at first. She had billions, and grief has a cruel way of making numbers meaningless until the numbers begin to mock you. By the time the 11th specialist came and went, she had spent $1,700,000 and bought nothing but deeper silence. The final man before Lucas Grant was Adrian Mercer, 52 years old, based in Beverly Hills, author of 2 respected books on Italian sports car restoration, a recurring name in automotive publications, and widely considered the most confident Miura authority in North America. He arrived in a Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow with 3 assistants and a leather tool case that looked more expensive than most college educations. He looked at the Lamborghini for no more than 20 seconds before turning to Eleanor with a smooth smile. The wiring harness in early generation Miuras is as complex as a Swiss movement, he said. Everyone before me has been working around the problem instead of at the source. I will replace the entire harness, every centimeter, $400,000, 3 weeks. I guarantee the result. Eleanor asked whether he had inspected each individual circuit before making that conclusion. Mercer smiled with the patient condescension of a man used to rich people asking questions they were expected not to understand. 30 years in this field, he said, do not require itemized confirmation. Eleanor signed the contract. 3 weeks later, Mercer called Diana and explained that the wiring harness replacement had been executed flawlessly, that the car's electrical architecture was now comprehensively renewed, and that the persistent failure to start indicated a congenital chassis defect with no reliable remedy. He returned $200,000 as a gesture of professional fairness and flew home the next morning. He did not apologize. That evening, Eleanor stood in the garage with the lights off for the first time since the process began. The shape of the Lamborghini sat beneath the black cloth in the faint light from the grounds outside. And for the first time, she pressed the heel of her hand against one eye because no one was watching. She was not crying for the money. She was crying because she had promised a dying man she could bring something back from the dead, and all her money had done was prove how powerless she really was. The next morning, she called Diana. I don't want another expert, Eleanor said, her voice flat in the way exhaustion becomes when it is too proud to tremble. I want someone who actually knows how things work. No magazine covers, no reputation, no speeches. Someone who cares about machines more than invoices. Diana was quiet on the other end. Not empty quiet. The specific quiet of an assistant who knows something useful but is not sure her employer will respect it. I know someone, Diana finally said, but you won't like the address. Grant Auto occupied a narrow building on a side street in Cicero, 8 miles west of the Chicago Loop, squeezed between a tire warehouse and an old brick building whose faded sign had become unreadable after too many winters. The corrugated metal facade had once been green, or tried to be. The roll-up door groaned when lifted. A classic rock station played from a dusty radio near a shelf of oil filters. At 8:15 on Wednesday morning, Diana Walsh stepped carefully around a puddle of melted snow and saw only a pair of work boots sticking out from beneath a 1984 Chevrolet Caprice on jack stands. "I'm looking for Lucas Grant," she said. The boots did not move. "You found him?" a voice answered from under the car. Diana explained who she worked for: the Whitmore estate, the Lamborghini, the $2 million offer. The ratchet stopped. "What year is the Miura?" the voice asked. 1971. The rolling board slid out, and Lucas Grant sat up, wiping his hands on a rag. He was 31, though work and responsibility had put several extra years around his eyes. His hair was brown and pushed back from his forehead. His hands looked like a record of every engine he had ever opened. He was not famous, not polished, not impressed enough. "P400 SV or SVJ?" Diana hesitated. "I don't know." Lucas stood. "Then I'll need the address." He did not say he could fix it. He did not ask how much the check was for. He did not even ask who had failed before him. He walked into the back office, took a brittle factory wiring diagram from a half-shelf dedicated entirely to Lamborghini Miuras, printed a cleaner copy, folded it into his breast pocket, and called through the doorway. "Maya, I'll be back before dinner. Stay with Grandpa Ray after school." Diana looked toward the office and saw a child's backpack hanging from a chair, a half-finished drawing of a blue car taped to the wall, and an older man seated near a heater with one hand curled stiffly in his lap. Lucas noticed her noticing. "My daughter," he said simply. 7. My father watches her when the shop runs late. Diana's expression softened, but Lucas did not invite sympathy. Sympathy, he had learned, was too often how comfortable people felt generous without being useful. Lucas had enrolled in automotive engineering at Illinois Institute of Technology when he was 19 and left at 21 after his father, Raymond Grant, suffered a stroke that made him unable to run the shop he had built across 26 years. Lucas told himself he would go back to school eventually, but eventually became oil changes, brake jobs, late invoices, school lunches, insurance forms, and a little girl who needed him more than a framed degree needed a wall. He never stopped reading. That was the part people missed. Behind Grant Auto, in a cramped office that smelled like paper, coffee, and old rubber, he had manuals in Italian, German, French, and Japanese, factory diagrams, technical journals, service bulletins, notes from dead mechanics whose families had sold entire lifetimes of knowledge by the pound at estate sales. Lucas read them the way other men read scripture, not for status, but because machines told the truth if you respected their language. A machine did not care about your reputation. It did not care whether your shoes were handmade. It did not care what magazine had profiled you. It only cared whether you understood cause and effect. That was why, when Lucas entered the Whitmore glass garage through the side entrance that afternoon, he did not look around like a tourist in a museum. He did not whistle at the size of the room. He did not compliment the architecture. He looked at the car. Eleanor was waiting near the tool cabinet, arms folded, expression controlled. She watched his uniform, his boots, the oil under his nails, and felt the reflexive disappointment of someone whose life had taught her that important answers arrived in expensive packaging. "You're the person Diana found," she said. Lucas looked at her without the deference she was used to receiving. "I'm whoever's left." It was not rude. It was accurate. That made it harder to dismiss. Eleanor gave him the history in 4 minutes. The night the engine died, the doctors, the specialists, the failed repairs, the money spent, the time lost. Then she placed the $2 million check on the steel table beside the Lamborghini. "Fix it, and this is yours," she said. "Fail, and I'll pay $500 for your time." Lucas did not look at the check. He walked around the covered car once, slowly, eyes moving along the roofline, the sill, the rear engine cover, the posture of it. Then he reached out and laid his palm gently on the hood through the velvet cloth, the way a doctor might place a hand on a chest before listening. The garage fell strangely quiet. Even Diana stopped typing on her phone. When it cut off that night, Lucas asked, "Was it immediate, or did it stumble for a few seconds and die?" Eleanor stopped. Of all the questions she had answered in 3 years, no one had asked that one first. "Immediate," she said. "My father said one moment it was running and the next it wasn't." Lucas nodded. "Did the lights dim?" "I don't know." "Did he smell fuel afterward?" "He never said." "Was anyone in the house?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "My father. Staff. Security. Our CFO had been there earlier for a briefing." "Earlier?" "I would have to check." Lucas pulled back the cover. The Lamborghini emerged beneath the halogen lights in a shade of yellow so alive it made the room itself seem ashamed of being still. Lucas did not react dramatically. He opened the front compartment and unfolded the wiring diagram from his pocket. He used a small LED flashlight, not the diagnostic towers and rolling computers the previous specialists had paraded through the garage. He moved with patience, tracing wire bundles with his fingers, not poking, not performing, simply following the sentence the car was trying to finish. Eleanor stood 6 feet away. Diana stood near the door. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Lucas stopped at the fuse block mounted on the firewall behind the passenger compartment. 42 individual fuses, each governing a different part of the car's electrical architecture. His flashlight stopped on position 7. He stared for a moment, then said, "Come here." Eleanor walked over reluctantly, bracing herself for another expensive theory. Lucas pointed. "Fuse number 7, primary circuit for fuel delivery. If this circuit opens, the engine cuts instantly. No sputter, no slow starvation, just silence." Eleanor folded her arms. "And?" Lucas removed the fuse carefully and held it up beneath the flashlight. "A blown fuse melts. You'll see the break, the heat damage, the char. This wire is intact." He turned the small component between 2 fingers. "It didn't blow. It was pulled." Eleanor's face did not change at first. Years of negotiating hostile acquisitions had taught her not to react until she understood the battlefield. "You're saying someone removed a fuse." "I'm saying someone removed this fuse by hand." "A $9 part?" "About $9, yes." Lucas met her eyes. "The question is not what it costs. The question is who wanted a $4 million car dead badly enough to hide the cause in plain sight." The silence that followed was not empty. It had weight. Eleanor looked at the fuse, then at the car, then toward the glass walls reflecting all of them back like witnesses. 3 years. 11 specialists. $1,700,000. Her father losing the will to live while a $9 fuse sat in a block waiting for someone humble enough to look before replacing half the car. Her first instinct was disbelief, not because Lucas lacked credibility, but because the truth was too small for the scale of the suffering around it. "Show me," she said. Lucas did. Calmly, without condescension, he walked her through the physical evidence. A fuse that fails naturally tells a story. Heat, breakage, distortion. This one told another. Intact wire, clean contact marks, no thermal damage, no corrosion. Removed, not ruined. Extracted, not failed. Eleanor listened, and something in her expression hardened. Not at Lucas, at the room, at the past, at everyone who had walked into her grief and charged her for not seeing. "Diana," Eleanor said, her voice suddenly cold enough to cut glass, "pull the garage security footage from the night my mother died." Diana was already moving. The estate security system kept 90 days of rolling footage and saved any motion-triggered event indefinitely. The garage had recorded one event at 11:47 p.m., the night Margaret Whitmore died. A laptop was set on the tool cabinet. The file opened. Eleanor, Diana, and Lucas watched as the grainy black-and-white image of the garage appeared on screen. At 11:47 and 9 seconds, the interior service door opened. A man entered. He wore dark clothing and moved without hesitation, not like an intruder searching, but like someone who knew exactly where to go. He walked to the front of the Lamborghini, opened the compartment, leaned in for 40 seconds, closed it, and left through the same door. Total time inside, 4 minutes and 13 seconds. The face was unclear, blurred by camera angle and low resolution. But the shoes were visible when he turned. Brown Oxford lace-ups, high vamp, distinctive double-stitch toe cap. Expensive enough to remember, specific enough to identify. Lucas looked not at the screen, but at Eleanor's face. "You know those shoes," he said softly. It was not a question. Eleanor did not answer. She looked at Diana. Access logs, main house, that date, every entry and exit from noon to midnight. Her voice did not shake. That was how Lucas knew she had already begun to suspect. Rich people, he had learned, could panic beautifully when money was threatened. But when family was betrayed, they became very still. Sebastian Crane arrived at the Whitmore estate that afternoon the way he arrived every Thursday, unannounced but expected. He was 45, well-built, silver threaded through dark hair, dressed in a navy suit that looked quiet from a distance and expensive up close. He had been with Whitmore Industries for 20 years and CFO for 7. He had stood beside Joseph in quarterly meetings, private negotiations, charity galas, and family funerals. He was not blood, but he had occupied the dangerous category of man who becomes close enough to be trusted like blood without ever having earned the cost of betrayal. He stepped into the garage with a leather folio beneath one arm and paused when he saw the Lamborghini uncovered, its front compartment open, and Lucas Grant in a blue work uniform leaning over the fuse block. Something moved across Sebastian's face so quickly most people would have missed it. A tightening at the jaw, a fractional compression of the mouth. Then it was gone, replaced by warmth. "Another specialist?" he asked Eleanor. "I thought you had given up on that." Eleanor smiled politely. "Not yet." Sebastian looked at Lucas. "And this is?" "Lucas Grant, my mechanic." The word mechanic landed in the room with Sebastian's faint amusement attached to it. Lucas straightened and looked at him, not defensively, not impressed, just filing details away. Sebastian gave him a polite nod and moved toward the door. Lucas's eyes dropped to his feet. Brown Oxford lace-ups, high vamp, double-stitch toe cap. He said nothing. Quiet is not weakness when a man is listening. By evening, Diana had the access logs. Sebastian Crane entered the main house at 11:31 p.m. the night Margaret died. He exited at 12:04 a.m. The garage motion event was 11:47 p.m. The timeline was clean. Too clean. Lucas photographed the log and sent it to Eleanor with no commentary. She was in her father's study when she received it, sitting in the chair Joseph had used every morning for 40 years, surrounded by shelves of books and framed photographs of a family before grief. Learned their address. Eleanor read the message once, then again. Then she placed the phone face down on the desk as if the screen itself might accuse her if she looked longer. At 10:07 p.m., she called her personal attorney, Alexander Rohr. "I need a full audit," she said. 3 years. Every transaction Sebastian Crane had signing authority on. Focus on mineral rights, extraction contracts, real estate transfers, and advisory payments. Rohr asked whether this was urgent. Eleanor looked at a photograph of her father and mother beside the Lamborghini in 1991, smiling somewhere in Utah beneath a sky too large to own. "It was urgent 3 years ago," she said. "I am only realizing it now." Lucas did not go home that night. He called his father, checked that his daughter had eaten dinner, promised Maya he would be home before breakfast if he could, and stayed in the garage under the work light, sitting on an overturned bucket while the Miura's hood remained open before him. He went through every invoice and repair order left by the 11 previous specialists, reading them the way he read wiring diagrams, looking for pattern beneath language. Most of the documents were vanity wrapped in technical vocabulary. But in Adrian Mercer's 43-page invoice, buried near the end under third-party consultation services, Lucas found an $85,000 payment to an unnamed vendor identified only by a routing number. He photographed it and sent it to Eleanor with one line: "I'm not a detective, but someone paid to make sure this car stayed broken." Eleanor came to the garage 15 minutes later. She did not arrive with an entourage. She did not ask Diana to bring coffee. She walked in wearing a dark sweater, hair tied back, face stripped of the corporate mask that made men twice her age sit straighter. Lucas was still on the bucket. The open hood threw a long shadow across the concrete. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eleanor sat on a second bucket beside him. It was such an ordinary action, and so unlike every version of her Lucas had imagined, that he almost smiled. "How much do you know?" she asked. "I know what I can see," he said. "The rest is your problem." "It's becoming everyone's problem," Eleanor replied. The audit came in 2 waves. The first summary arrived at 6:47 the following morning. A land rights transfer agreement executed 3 years earlier had granted extraction rights for a rare earth mineral deposit in southern Colorado to a holding company called Crane Allied Resources. Contract value: $340 million. The signature on behalf of Whitmore Industries was Joseph Whitmore's. But Joseph had been admitted to Mercy General 11 days before the execution date. His medical records showed continuous morphine infusion, limited cognitive clarity, and no Whitmore family attorney present at signing. The second wave arrived at noon and was worse. The contract directed $48 million in advisory fees to Crane Allied Resources through 3 intermediary accounts. Buried in an appendix, written in dense legal language designed to outlive attention, was a collateral clause. If the Whitmore family disposed of certain listed personal assets, including Joseph Whitmore's 1971 Lamborghini Miura, control of the extraction rights would transfer permanently and irrevocably to Crane Allied Resources. The Lamborghini had not been broken by grief. It had been silenced by greed. If Eleanor gave up and sold it after spending millions, Sebastian Crane would gain control of a mineral deposit worth hundreds of millions. The car had to stay dead. Joseph had to lose hope. Eleanor had to exhaust every reputable solution until surrender looked like wisdom. When Lucas read the clause, he leaned back and let out a long breath. He had seen scams before: odometer rollbacks, fake parts, insurance fraud, customers charged for repairs never made. But this was different. This was a man using a dying husband, a dead wife, a grieving daughter, and a silent machine as pieces on a board. Lucas looked at the yellow Lamborghini and felt, for the first time, not technical curiosity, but anger. Quiet anger. The useful kind. The kind that sharpens a man instead of spending him. Sebastian Crane arrived the next morning without a scheduled appointment, which told Lucas everything before the man opened his mouth. People with clean hands wait for invitations. People who feel truth moving toward them arrive early. Eleanor was not yet in the garage. Diana had flagged Sebastian's arrival, but Lucas was alone at the front of the car, replacing the fuse block cover loosely, tools arranged near his elbow. Sebastian stopped several feet away and looked at him the way a man looks at a locked gate. He is deciding whether to climb or brake. "I'm going to be direct," Sebastian said. His voice was smooth, businesslike, almost bored. "I don't know what you think you found, and I don't particularly care. I will pay you $5 million cash to tell Eleanor Whitmore the vehicle cannot be repaired and returned to wherever you came from." Lucas wiped his hands slowly on a rag. Sebastian continued, mistaking silence for negotiation. "You will never work on a car worth more than $10,000 again if you stay. You'll have $5 million if you leave. This is a straightforward offer." Lucas looked at him for a long moment. $5 million. Enough to pay off the shop. Enough to buy his father better medical care. Enough to send Maya to any school she wanted. Enough to stop lying awake at night wondering which bill could wait without becoming a crisis. There are moments when temptation does not arrive dressed as evil. It arrives dressed as relief. Lucas thought of his daughter sleeping on the office couch during late winters because childcare cost too much. He thought of his father trying to hide the pain in his bad hand. He thought of every ordinary engine in Cicero waiting for repairs people could barely afford. Then he looked at Sebastian Crane's polished shoes and understood something simple. Money that asks a man to become smaller is never a rescue. It is a cage with velvet bars. "Here's what I see," Lucas said. "You walked into this garage the night Margaret Whitmore died and pulled fuse number 7 out of that car. You paid Adrian Mercer $85,000 to make sure his work failed. You wrote a contract clause that needed the Lamborghini to remain broken so you could steal control of a $340 million mineral deposit from a man on a morphine drip who didn't have a lawyer in the room." Sebastian's face went still. Not pale, not angry yet. Still, the stillness of calculation. $5 million, Lucas continued, doesn't buy any of that. Sebastian's mouth tightened. "You're a mechanic from Cicero." There it was. Not an argument. A class verdict. Lucas had heard versions of it all his life from men who believed a blue uniform erased intelligence. "No one will believe a word you say," Sebastian said. Lucas held his eye. "The camera will." Sebastian turned toward the exit quickly, not running, but moving with the compressed urgency of a man who knows the floor beneath him has cracked. He reached the garage door and stopped. Eleanor Whitmore stood in the corridor outside, phone in hand, recording app open. Diana stood behind her. 2 estate security men stood further back. Eleanor's expression was not fury. Fury would have been easier. Her face was quiet, and that quiet seemed to make Sebastian smaller. "You worked with my father for 20 years, she said. "He trusted you." Sebastian adjusted his cuffs, trying to assemble dignity from habit. "Eleanor, you are emotional. You have been misled by a man who clearly does not understand the complexity of—" Eleanor raised one hand. The gesture stopped him more effectively than shouting. "A signature obtained from a heavily medicated man without independent legal representation is voidable under Illinois law. My attorney has been awake since last night, so, by now, has yours." Sebastian's eyes flicked toward Lucas. Hatred flashed there, but beneath it was humiliation, not remorse. Men like Sebastian often regret being caught long before they regret doing harm. "You cannot prove intent," he said. Lucas picked up the removed fuse from the tray beside the car and held it between 2 fingers. "You left fingerprints on small things because you were too busy thinking about big ones." The garage fell silent. Diana looked at the fuse, then at Sebastian. Eleanor did not move. Sebastian opened his mouth, then closed it. The estate security men stepped forward. For a moment, he looked at Eleanor with something that might have become an apology if it had ever learned to face the right direction. But he said nothing. He allowed himself to be escorted out. When his car disappeared down the long driveway, Eleanor remained in the garage doorway, watching the empty space he left behind. Morning light came through the glass panels at a low angle, falling across the polished concrete in pale bars. Lucas stood beside the Lamborghini, holding a new fuse he had bought from an ordinary auto parts store on the way in that morning. $9 including tax. He turned it once between thumb and forefinger. Eleanor walked slowly to the front of the car. "Do you want to do it?" Lucas asked. She looked at the fuse. Such a small thing. So ordinary. So cheap. 3 years of silence. One father fading. A fortune wasted. A betrayal hidden in a component small enough to lose in a pocket. Eleanor shook her head. "You do it." Lucas placed the fuse into position 7 with care. He did not rush. Some repairs are mechanical. Some repairs are ceremonial, though no manual will ever admit it. The fuse clicked into place with a sound so small it barely rose above the ambient quiet of the room. Lucas stepped back. Eleanor walked around to the driver's door and opened it. For the first time in 3 years, she sat inside her father's Lamborghini. The cockpit smelled like aged leather, dust, and memory. Her mother had sat there once. Her father had gripped that wheel with joy. Eleanor placed both hands on it now, and they were not steady. "Key halfway first," Lucas said softly. "Let the pump wake up." She nodded and turned the key. A faint mechanical hum answered. Not loud, not dramatic, but alive. Diana covered her mouth near the door. Eleanor turned the key further. The starter spun. Once. Twice. Then the V12 caught. The engine erupted into a deep, resonant growl that rolled through the garage, through the glass walls, through the polished floor, through Eleanor's bones. It was not gentle. It was not polite. It was a sound designed by people who believed machinery could sing, if built with enough conviction. The Lamborghini roared as if clearing its throat after 3 years of forced silence. Eleanor sat frozen, both hands on the wheel. Her mouth trembled once. She did not cry loudly. She did not collapse into sentiment. She lowered her head and let one tear fall onto the leather because sometimes the heart needs only one witness. And sometimes that witness is a mechanic standing outside the open door, saying nothing because dignity knows when not to interrupt grief. The entire glass garage seemed to hold its breath. Then Diana whispered, "Your father." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Call Dr. Brennan," Lucas said. He did not need to say more. Mercy General had rules about vehicles near patient windows, but wealth can bend rules, and love can sometimes justify the bending. Dr. Brennan gave permission after 90 seconds on hold. "3rd floor, north-facing windows," he said. "Drive where he can see it." Less than an hour later, the yellow Lamborghini rolled slowly into the hospital visitors' lot, its V12 idling low and steady, the sound bouncing off concrete walls and winter air. Nurses turned from the entrance. Security guards stared. A man dropping off flowers froze mid-step. Eleanor parked beneath the 3rd floor window, stepped out, and rested one hand on the roof. Above her, Joseph Whitmore lay in bed, weak from illness, hollowed by grief, barely responsive since the night before. The nurse on duty later wrote in the care log that at 9:52 a.m., Mr. Whitmore sat up without assistance for the first time in weeks. He turned toward the window. His hand rose slowly, trembling, then pressed flat against the glass. Eleanor saw him from below and lifted her own hand. The engine idled between them like a bridge thrown across 3 years of sorrow. Joseph said something the nurse could not understand at first, so she stepped closer. He repeated it, eyes fixed on the car. "She's still running." The nurse assumed he meant the Lamborghini. Eleanor, when she heard those words later, understood he meant Margaret, or memory, or love, or himself. Maybe all of them. That afternoon, Dr. Brennan's note in the medical file said, "Patient demonstrated significant positive behavioral shift following external stimulus. Increased verbal engagement. Improved appetite. Requested television remote for first time in 6 weeks. Mechanism unclear. Will monitor." Doctors often write "mechanism unclear" when medicine has no neat box for grace. But Eleanor knew the mechanism. Lucas knew it too. A man who had stopped believing tomorrow held anything worth meeting, had heard an old engine speak in a language only his heart still knew. Joseph Whitmore was not healed in the simple way stories sometimes pretend. His lungs remained damaged, his body remained frail, time remained honest. But 12 weeks later, he was discharged from Mercy General. He came home in a wheelchair, then stood slowly at the garage entrance with Eleanor beside him. The black velvet cover was folded on a shelf. The Lamborghini sat uncovered beneath the halogen lights, yellow paint alive again. Joseph looked at it for a long time. "You fixed the car," he said. Eleanor shook her head. "Someone else fixed it. I just found the right person." Joseph's smile was faint but real. "That's harder," he said. 6 weeks after Sebastian Crane was escorted from the estate, he was indicted on financial fraud connected to the mineral rights transfer, procurement of a signature from a party without legal capacity, and conspiracy to impede a lawful business investigation tied to the $85,000 payment to Adrian Mercer. The $340 million extraction contract was voided by an Illinois circuit court. Whitmore Industries recovered $48 million in advisory fees plus interest. Adrian Mercer settled quietly, repaid the $85,000, and surrendered his professional restoration certification in Illinois. He did not contest either action. Men who build reputations on certainty rarely enjoy courtrooms where facts are allowed to speak. But the most important sentence was never written in the legal filings. It was spoken one evening in Grant Auto when Eleanor arrived unannounced and found Lucas changing brake pads on a pickup truck while his daughter Maya sat at the office desk doing homework beside Raymond Grant. Eleanor stood awkwardly near the roll-up door in a coat worth more than the Caprice on Bay 2. Lucas looked over. "Something wrong with the Miura?" "No," Eleanor said. "It runs beautifully." "Then you're lost." Maya giggled from the office. Eleanor smiled despite herself and held out a formal contract. She offered Lucas a standing maintenance agreement for the entire Whitmore family vehicle collection. 17 cars, from a 1953 Jaguar XK 120 to a 1982 Ferrari Berlinetta Boxer. The retainer alone would allow him to close the old shop, move into a proper facility, hire staff, pay for his father's care, and stop worrying about whether winter would break the roof. Lucas read the document that night after putting Maya to bed. He sat in the office beneath the fluorescent light, the old radio off, the shop finally quiet. $5 million would have bought his silence. This contract would buy stability. But he still felt the weight of the condition he needed to attach. The next morning, he met Eleanor in the Whitmore garage. "I'll take it," he said, "on one condition." Eleanor lifted an eyebrow. "Which is?" "Grant Auto stays open in Cicero. Same customers, same building for now. I'll hire help if I need to, but I'm not shutting it down to become some private collection caretaker in a rich man's garage." Eleanor studied him. "That is an unusual condition." "No," Lucas said. "It's the reason I still know what I'm doing." She waited. He looked toward the Lamborghini. A man who stops listening to ordinary engines eventually forgets how machines speak. The Corollas, the Caprices, the old pickups with rusted frames and owners who count cash twice before handing it over. That's where you learn to look for the simple thing first. That's where you learn not to replace a man's whole life when all he needs is a fuse. Eleanor was quiet. Then she signed the revised agreement. Then Grant Auto stays open. Over the next months, Lucas's life changed without becoming unrecognizable, which was exactly how he wanted it. Maya got new shoes without him checking the clearance rack first. Raymond received better physical therapy. The shop roof was repaired. Lucas hired 2 young mechanics from the neighborhood and made them read manuals before touching anything they did not understand. Eleanor began visiting the garage more often, sometimes for updates, sometimes with Joseph, sometimes for no clear reason at all. The first time Joseph came, he rolled into Grant Auto in his chair, looked around at the crowded bays, the oil stains, the radio, the mismatched tools, and smiled like a man entering a church that did not know it was holy. "This smells like honest work," he said. Lucas laughed. "It mostly smells like old coolant. Same thing if you live long enough." Maya showed Joseph her drawing of the yellow Lamborghini, which she had colored too brightly and given wings. Joseph declared it a masterpiece and asked if he could hang a copy in the glass garage. Maya asked if billionaires were allowed to use tape on walls. Joseph said, "Only if 7-year-old artists approve the placement." Eleanor watched from near the door, and something in her softened. Not all at once, not dramatically. She was still Eleanor Whitmore. She still ran meetings with precision. She still ended foolishness with a look. But she had learned that expertise without humility is only expensive noise. She had learned that love can become trapped inside objects, songs, engines, and rooms, waiting for someone patient enough to listen, and she had learned that her father had not needed a miracle as much as he had needed one honest man to ask the question everyone else had been too proud to ask. One Thursday evening, long after Sebastian's name had disappeared from the company directory and long after the Miura had become part of Joseph's weekly routine again, Eleanor sat alone in the glass garage with the overhead lights off and only the halogen fixtures glowing. The yellow paint looked lit from within. The Lamborghini idled low and steady, filling the room with a sound that was less mechanical now and more like a heartbeat returning after a long pause. Eleanor sat in the driver's seat without going anywhere. Her hands rested on the wheel. The vibration of the V12 moved through the chassis, through the leather, through her spine. She thought of 11 specialists who had looked at a $4 million car and seen a $4 million problem. She thought of $1,700,000 spent on fuel systems, wiring harnesses, ignition components, and ego. She thought of Adrian Mercer and his guarantees, Sebastian Crane and his betrayal, Diana's quiet courage in suggesting an address Eleanor would not like, and Lucas Grant walking through the side door in a blue uniform with oil on his hands, refusing to look at a $2 million check because the machine mattered more than the money. On the passenger seat beside her lay a small object in a clear evidence sleeve, the original fuse from position 7. Lucas had given it to her after the legal case no longer needed it. "Keep it," he had said. "Not because it's worth anything, because it isn't. That's the point." Eleanor picked it up now and held it under the halogen light. A $9 fuse, clean wire, no burn mark, no dramatic failure, just absence disguised as mystery. There are problems that look enormous because the wrong people are profiting from their size. There are silences that last for years because everyone in the room is too impressed by complexity to ask what simple thing is missing. There are men who wear suits and steal futures with clean hands, and there are men in work uniforms who restore dignity with a flashlight, a diagram, and the courage not to be bought. The engine ran on, patient and deep. Somewhere upstairs, Joseph Whitmore sat near a window, not fully recovered, not young again, not untouched by grief, but present. Alive enough to ask about spring. Alive enough to talk about taking the Miura out when the roads warmed. Alive enough to remember the summer of 1991 not as a door closed behind him, but as proof that the road ahead could still hold light. At Grant Auto in Cicero, Lucas worked late beneath fluorescent lights while Maya slept on the office couch under her grandfather's jacket. A math worksheet tucked beneath one hand. A rusted pickup waited on Bay 1. A Ferrari part sat boxed on the shelf. Two worlds had met because one billionaire thought $2 million could purchase the answer, and one mechanic knew the answer might cost $9 if someone would only look with respect. And in the end, the richest person in that glass garage was not the woman with the check. It was the man who could not be bought away from the truth. Because dignity does not need marble floors. Wisdom does not need a famous name. And sometimes, when pride has spent millions failing loudly, grace enters quietly, kneels beside the problem, and asks, "Has anyone checked the fuse?" In life, we often chase grand solutions, believing that money, status, or expertise alone can solve our deepest problems. Eleanor Whitmore's story reminds us that sometimes the answers lie in simplicity, patience, and genuine care. After years of failed attempts by specialists and millions spent, it was not a famous mechanic or a costly overhaul that restored her father's Lamborghini. It was a man willing to ask a small question, examine a $9 fuse, and act with integrity. This narrative teaches us that value is not always measured in price or prestige, but in attention, empathy, and the courage to see what others overlook. In our own lives, we might overlook the small fuses, the overlooked gestures, honest conversations, or tiny actions that can reignite hope, mend relationships, or revive passion. Eleanor's journey also underscores the quiet power of humility, the dignity of listening, and the profound impact of second chances. Wealth cannot buy these lessons. They come from observing, caring, and acting with heart. So, take a moment today to notice the small yet essential things that might restore life, joy, or connection around you. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. What small fuse in your life has made the biggest difference? And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire reflection, resilience, and real-life wisdom.